All right, welcome to the campfire. This one is going to be a lot of fun because of the background that you have.
Nice to meet you, Mike. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's go ahead and jump right in because I'm really excited. I want to hear about this unique and interesting background.
So, I grew up in a rural community farming, married a dairy farmer who was a fifth generation farmer. Um, got into working with him in the dairy, but grew up myself riding and racing horses. So, that was a great part of my life until my early 40s when he passed away. And then I sold my part of the business and went back to school, got my training in master's and PhD as a licensed mental health counselor, now working in private practice. But one of the things I love the most is being in the rural community. My home now is in the woods. I love it. I think being outdoors is probably one of the most therapeutic things that you can do. I work with a lot of men that are in the rural community, farmers, contractors, because they know that I'm not just approaching them from an academic standpoint, but I actually have lived and lived the life. So I understand it. And I really emphasize how therapeutic it can be to be outdoors and be and embrace that type of a lifestyle if you have access to it.
Well, that's the part that really got me excited because it was actually the outdoors that almost took my life but saved my life at the same time after blotched suicide attempt. So I'm kind of curious as to some of the challenges that you run into being a mental health expert and helping people in the rural community.
Some of the challenges we run into, and it's starting to change, is this stigma about reaching out and getting help. And when you do reach out and get help with someone that you find a good fit with, it's not just talking about what's wrong with you, but it's really kind of more of an educational way of seeing things and not saying, okay, this is who you should be and this is what you need to do, but seeing you who you are, trying to get both myself and you to see who you are as your authentic self, and then building off of that. And one of the things from my years in practice that I've noticed is what people think what's wrong with them is sometimes actually their superpower. And it's just maybe crossed a line at some point in their life. You're reacting to that. I can see the smile going up on your face.
Though I love that because you know what, actually growing up, I was diagnosed with every form of depression known to man. And I always let that dictate how I engaged with the world. But after that suicide attempt, everything changed. And I really made a commitment to myself to, find help in learning how to define myself in a new light based off of this is what I was told it was. But if that's really what's in me, it's got to be something that's going to help me to go forward. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I found myself where I'm at now.
Yeah, and I really like that it takes people such as yourself to be open and vulnerable to talk about this topic, because the more we talk about it and the more we can talk about ourselves and our own experiences, it takes vulnerability, and vulnerability is strength, not a weakness. And we think being vulnerable in many areas of our culture is a sign of weakness, but it isn't. It takes strength. Not everybody deserves to hear your story, and if they're going to hurt you or harm you, but to put it out there so other people can hear it, because we don't know who's struggling. And I call that kind of like a Me Too effect, where you're saying, yeah, me too. And that kind of models or role models for other people to say, yeah, I'm not alone in this. And it's okay to reach out and ask for help. So that's what I'm liking about what's changing, but it's still something that we need to kind of support each other with to get that stigma removed about. I mean, if you break your leg, it's really painful, and you're what do? You just say, I'm just going to ignore this, and then you ignore it and it gets worse and worse, and it literally cripples you if you don't take care of it, rather than knowing they're just going to take care of it, you're going to go in. It might be a little painful at first, but then you get on with your life and everything's healed. It's kind of the same idea. If you keep ignoring the problem, or you're getting the wrong information, it just listening to your intuition, like, I'm just being labeled with this and labeled with that. That's just not it. There's something more to me. That's what we want to encourage.
That's where I can remember myself being in those early stages, that depression became who I was, ultimately led me to that moment. And then when I pulled through the other side of that and I wanted to get help, it was a mission of breaking stigmas first. Because I remember the first counselor that I reached out to after listening to my story for the hour. She goes, "You've got an illness." And then that was the end of it. And I'm like, that, what do I do now?
Mm-mm.
Do I sit on a couch and wait for it to kill me or cripple me or whatever the case may be? And then I found another outlet. I found somebody that I could actually identify with, relate with, and have these kind of conversations. And she actually helped me to break a lot of the stigmas that formed the project. Namely, it's based around meditation in the outdoors. I always thought meditation was the idea of you got to shave your head, you got to be silent, you got to be still, you got to buy the old chant CDs from the 90s. And after talking to her about it, and well, arguing with her about it, I went around back and I picked up my crossbow and I realized that was the breath work she was talking about. That was the controlled thoughts so you can process, and all these neat little things that I was already utilizing in my life. So then it was a matter of going into somewhere that I felt safe doing these things, which obviously was the outdoors. And it helped me just profoundly move myself forward.
Mm. I really like where you're what you've learned from that, because you starting when somebody is saying, okay, you've got an illness, it's kind of looking at it from a deficits base, and you're like, wow. And then a lot of, especially younger people, but it becomes your identity. And that's heartbreaking to hear that, because it's not really like what's wrong with you. It's more like, let's take a look at, like, what didn't you get in your life, maybe what happened to you, but really looking at what you didn't get in your life. And if we look at trauma as, or labels of mental illnesses, and there are some severe mental illnesses, but if you're just looking at it, it's like we're missing something. There's something that we didn't get in our life, and we're always looking at what happened, what's wrong, what happened, but what didn't happen. A lot of times it's like we weren't seen, heard, or valued. So in that way, if our family members and our caretakers weren't able, or in a place in their lives where they couldn't see, hear, and value us as we were growing up as children, we don't learn to develop that same skill towards ourselves and maybe towards our other family members. But I really love the idea of taking a different perspective on mindfulness, not having to go shave your head, which is funny because I was imagining that, and putting the robe on and going, sitting on top of the mountain and kind of disappearing. That's kind of bypassing, that we still have to pay taxes and go to work and function. But is that mindfulness, I look at it as there's different ways. Meditation, there's so many different ways, but think of it more like a type of being in that present moment. So as human beings, right, we can spend our life doing, which is doing, which is really important. So doing is kind of like based in the structure of time. Like, I have to be up at this time, I have to take care of my kids, my family, my adult, my older parents, all these things. I have to go to work, I have to pay my bills. Doing, which is really important. However, if that's all we do, we're disconnected from ourselves. We disconnect from the being part of ourselves. And being connected is not just being connected with other people, but we are part of nature and being connected in the outdoors. So whatever that is for you or for me, is just getting to that place of being. Where does that suit me the best? If it's sitting out in the woods, going hunting, just part of hunting isn't just how therapeutic is that? It's not just about, shooting a deer and getting food and feeding your family, but it's just about being out in nature. So pay attention to how much we aren't taking time to just be in that moment, present somewhere. For me, and for like what you're saying, Mike, is that you're carving time out of your day to be. And if we don't do that, then we spend our lives being disconnected from ourselves. And that's part of mental health issues is about self-avoidance. And that's where when we come in and we're working with somebody is we look at all those aspects of how am I avoiding myself and avoiding the reality of the present moment.
It's that disconnect that I think really fills out the theme for a lot of people. I think about my relationship with when I go out hunting and how that's evolved through the course of this mindful journey. Before I started it, it was always about let's get in and get out as quick as we can. And the sitting still part, I was more focused on the consequence that if I moved or made sound, then I'd be heard and I wouldn't get the opportunity to take the deer. Now it's about that connection and what I can learn from that animal. And a great story that I love sharing all the time is how I really learned to come to grips with my social anxiety. I started doing the podcast to work on it, but where the heart started to really connect and beat with it was actually in the height of the rut on November 15th, a few years back. I learned to develop this relationship with how I hunt based on I've got to see a deer before I'm willing to shoot on it. So this deer that morning come in and it was cold, it was miserable. And I let him come through and I just watched him. And I'm thinking to myself, because I've never seen him before and I won't shoot him, what am I doing? I call myself a hunter, but I'm not doing the job. Instead, I thought a little deeper and almost got into like a meditative state about it. And on my heart at the time was the struggles with anxiety. And I thought about Longhorn as I watched him and how he was out there that morning doing his job, trying to procreate, putting himself in risk in order to get the job done, knowing that if he observed danger, he had the skills in the back of his head to get out of there, to protect himself. Now, an anxiety attack isn't life and death per se. It'll feel that way. But to realize that if I put myself in his hoops, I could actually remember I've got the skills to get through that situation that is just tormenting me and triggering these anxiety attacks. So it's within me to still be able to walk through them and feel the feelings at the same time.
One of the things that we do, and for the listeners to pay attention to, is how we chronically avoid ourselves. And if we're having problems and we're struggling, is because it is based in some kind of avoidance. It could be avoiding our anxiety, trying to manage or cope with our anxiety, rather than like what you're saying is that you went into a deeper level and you sit with it and you connect with it. And you connect with what's happening in that moment. And if it's really severe anxiety, it is really awful. I'm not going to say that this is going to be, but you're walking through it rather than running from it. And when we run from the situation, it doesn't go anywhere. It gets bigger. And as we get older, it gets worse. It doesn't get easier. You think, oh, I'll grow out of this or it'll get better. It doesn't if we don't stop and look at it and face it. And that's really scary. But when you do it, it kind of like it starts to leave us alone and go away. And then we get to that place of inner peace.
That resonates a lot with the build up to that story. because everything changed after my second divorce, and I really fell into that depressive, anxiety ridden stage. And I remember where the world started to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And I kept telling myself, it's okay. I'm happy with this. And it got to a point where I would spend probably 20 out of a 24-hour day, I'd spend 20 of those hours hiding in a very tiny tent. That was my existence. I was okay with that because I thought I had led myself there. And when I was standing out there that day watching Longhorn, I saw how big the world could be.
Mm.
It reminded me, as long as I was willing to trust myself, as long as I was willing to actually do the work and carry myself on my shoulders when those more crippling feelings came up, I could achieve exactly what he was doing. I could have that big world again.
Yeah, it's connecting with yourself, and when you can't do that, one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, what are we so afraid of? What is our biggest fear? And it is really hard to do this on your own. I don't recommend it. There's a time when you get help and you talk to somebody, and then you get the understanding, the education, and then you can start developing it on your own. You can say, okay, what do I need to do to get a better relationship with myself? So one of the biggest things that I'm asking people to do is, if you want to have a better relationship with people and your environment, and the beauty of being outside, is has to start with the deep, intimate relationship that we have with ourselves. This way of being kinder to ourselves. It's one of the books that I'm in the middle of writing right now. It's called Kinder to Myself. And also looking at the ways at how cruel we are to ourselves, how unkind we are, the labels, the things that we call ourselves, the identities that we give ourselves or that somebody else has given us, and that we buy into that. Is just, what is this relationship? How well am I treating myself? And if we're not treating ourselves well and kindly, and this is a process, it takes practice, and then we're really not going to have really good, deep, intimate relationships with anybody or anything. It can be very shallow with other human beings, to let people treat us poorly or choose people that are not kind to us. So it's like, again, it all steps back to getting learning about how to have a better relationship with yourself, and what am I doing that's not a good relationship with myself. And sometimes we're just not aware of it, and bringing that into awareness. And when, for even my own personal experiences, is the more I've done the work with myself, things don't bother me as much. My anxiety is really low. When bad things happen, like it does in anybody's life, it just doesn't bother me as much. I don't go into a state of panic or fear. It's just like, yeah, I'm okay. This happened, but I'm okay. Broke up with somebody. It's okay. I'm not devastated by it. I'm like, why not? Oh, because I'm okay. And that's a really beautiful place to get. It does come with age and wisdom. That's a big help. So if you're younger, in your 20s or so, and you're listening to this and you're like, what? It takes a lot of work and effort to get to this point. But once you do get to this deep relationship with yourself, being present, it's just absolutely beautiful and peaceful. And that's kind of what we're all looking for, right? What do you want? What's your goal? I want to be happy. Well, that's it. That's the work that we have to do.
I think it's beautiful that you went there with it. And I want to add on to that the fact that if you imply the intention to get there, you start out kind of working maybe some long-term goals. And it all seems to bring you back to that idea of self-talk. That I feel is where you start to gauge how you're making progress along the journey, because that self-talk is so fundamental. I remember, growing up and having all those stigmas put around me, and that was exactly what I thought of myself. That was how I would talk to myself. It was very cruel to myself based off of that alone. And when you get to a point where you start to become aware of that, I feel like it's almost walking up to a gigantic rock. You can see the visual of the way you are and the way that your patterns, but then there's something that makes you want to push that rock over. And the other side is like all shiny and soft and very clean and clear. But it can be weird to touch that. Because I remember having a conversation recently with this guy that he suffers from bipolarism. And what they taught him was to sit down and be quiet.
Mhm.
So as I heard him describe his practices and how he was pushing himself under, and then I stopped and I'm like, why do you do that? Thinking about why I did it myself. He had no answer for it. He wasn't even aware
Mhm.
that there was anything different to it. That's where it becomes fun. That's where it becomes an adventure. Because once you get that intentionism behind it, it doesn't matter if you know where you're going or not. Being willing to shift and learn as you go makes it so much fun.
I love that you're explaining it from like, this is my intention, like this is I'm meaning I'm doing this on purpose, and that it is fun. But in some ways, when it's not in your conscious awareness, and we'll sit in a session with somebody, I'll sit there and I'll say, oh, did you notice that you just put yourself down? Did you notice that you just went, oh my God, and they're like, what? No, I'm not even realizing this. Oh, I've done this my whole life. So it's not like we're blaming anybody, because we're socialized that way. I mean, watch how people talk on watching any kind of media, television, movies. And and it's just, we just hear it all around us. But then all of a sudden, when we start tuning into our own self-deprecation, if that's what you want to call it, maybe even to the point of self-loathing, and then you start seeing it, noticing it, it's like, oh my God, I just called myself stupid. And I remember that time when that light bulb went off for me, because I remember I got an 80 on an exam. I was like, oh my God, it was like devastating. I just couldn't have an 80, which is really, it's really good. And I was like, wow, I am so stupid. And I'm literally calling myself stupid, walking out to my car. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not stupid. They let me in this program. And then I just shifted the perspective, the way I was seeing it. No, I just didn't understand. I was learning from something. But the awareness of the way we're talking to ourselves and the way we're relating to ourselves in such a negative way is so habitual in our culture, that when you make that shift and you start being kinder to yourself, everything starts to change. You start to see things that you never saw before. One of the things that will come up, though, is we're so used to not being kind to ourselves. When we start talking to ourselves more kindly, or thinking of ourselves more kindly, and letting go of the labels and the negative stuff, it's really odd. It's kind of uncomfortable. It seems kind of foreign. So it may take a little while to get used to it. And I don't mean like standing in front of the mirror and doing positive affirmations, because if you don't believe stuff, that's bullshit. It's not going to work. Oh, you're beautiful. And if you don't feel beautiful, or I love you, looking in the mirror, it's just lying to yourself. I mean, if there's something about yourself that's a fact that you want to change, let's just say, like, I'm overweight. That's not being cruel. That's how you feel. That's where you're at in your life. That's being connected to yourself, saying, hey, this is a fact. I'm overweight and I'm not okay with it. So that's not being self-deprecating. It's like when you're saying, oh my God, I'm such a fat lazy slab and I'm useless and I'll never get this right. There's a tone with that one. It's negative language with a tone. But it is okay to be a work in progress and say, hey, you know what? I want to be better. I want to do better. I'm not where I want to be. So be careful of when people are saying positive affirmations. It's kind of like positive toxicity. It just isn't what we mean. We're talking about that deeper connection with yourself, with just being okay with who you are and where you are right now. And I ask a lot of my patients that, and in some parts of their life, they may say, yeah, I am okay with who I am. But a lot of people just say, look at themselves. And I say, are you okay? Do you like who you are just the way you are right now? And sometimes all of a sudden these tears and all of the emotions start to come up because they can't say yes. And that's what we're going for, is that deeper connection, honest connection with ourselves, is like, yeah, I'm okay with who I am right now. Hey, I'm a work in progress. Hey, I got more problems because I'm getting older. But it doesn't mean that we're not just, hey, I'm okay. Can we get to that point? That's a beautiful place to be in your life if we can get there.
That's where I feel like that avoidance, to go back to the beginning parts of this conversation, really hinder us,
Mm.
because avoidance ends up leading us to want to chase those goals that we set day to day to day to day. And if we're not hitting those marks, we're not feeling like we're okay. We're looking for something visual that we can look at and say, this is a mark of being okay. And if you take that away, it gets very scary, very uncomfortable, because
Mhm.
you don't have a point of reference. And I think, through mindfulness, you develop this sense of understanding that that point of reference is unique to you, and it comes based off of everything that you've experienced along the way.
Our backgrounds are so important. Everything that you've experienced along the way, no matter how many mistakes we've made, what difficult situation we've been in our lives, we can look at it as like, oh, it's horrible. All these horrible things happen, or I did all these horrible things. But some of the worst experience in our lives are our best educators. Some of our biggest failures in life are our best educators. So when something isn't, looking at my past, I wouldn't be where I am right now if I hadn't done all the stupid things I've done in my life. I was in a really bad abusive relationship right after my husband passed away. And I was with a guy for a while, and he was very verbally abusive. And I can look at that and just shake my head, but that experience and that relationship, as bad as it was, taught me more than anything as far as relationship goes. And then going back to like that Me Too effect, is I can say, yeah, I can see the signs. I can see someone coming into my office. I'm like, okay, that's an abusive relationship. And they're like, what? And seeing everything that we have gone through is a learning and growing experience if we choose to have that perspective, or we can see it as a failure. I'm useless. It's just looking at it from a negative, harmful way rather than just saying, yeah, look what I've learned from this. The other thing is that if someone's really had a bad experience, something very traumatic, isn't it easier to talk to somebody that's also had a similar experience because you get me on a deeper level? So we have a way of being with people if we've had some severe trauma or some really scary things going, as you're saying, like in a state of depression and getting to a place of thinking suicide. That is so connecting to somebody that's in that place. I'd rather talk to you than anybody on that topic, because you're going to get me on a deep, intimate level. And that's what we're looking for, is that kind of intimacy.
I think it's all about just finding your tribe, per se. It's finding those people that really understand where you've been. And in order to get there, you really gotta, it actually brings up a line from the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, where he's talking about how it's unfortunate all this stuff has happened. And then he turns around in the next line, he goes, no, it's actually fortunate. I'm grateful all this stuff has happened to me, because I learned from it the way that only I could. I handled it the way that only I could. And it boils down to this idea of accepting that we're trying to get through the moment based off of what we know within the vocabulary that we have at that moment in real time. And I think the more that we understand that and we start to look for ways to expand it, it brings us into that tribe, almost like a spider web. One thread at a time, we find these deep connections with people that we can relate to, find comfort, find understanding, and also build this beautiful web that's going to nurture all of us together.
Mm. There's a great balance with that, looking at life in a place of balance where you are finding that tribe and that web, but you're also finding that being, going back to that connecting with yourself and connecting with others, is finding a balance between those two, because we can kind of over connect with people or over isolate, thinking of it like a pendulum, social versus solo, and really finding, where am I at right now, really tuning into yourself. Do I need to be more with the tribe right now, or do I need to be, where am I balancing as far as like my own meditation, my own mindfulness approach to being with me and not avoiding myself. And that's where, like, you and I are similar, is we're finding that in different ways in nature. I love where I live in the Northeast because we have seasons, and I mean, it's just great. I'm looking forward to each season and getting out, and even in the wintertime, getting out. And I'm a big skier, and being in the woods is just amazing. But and I like what you're saying, is that we are finding those people that can support us, but we also have to be able to see and support ourselves, and finding a combination of those two things, and being really accepting of the reality of where we're at. And it just circles right back to where we started, is let's not avoid ourselves. Let's stop doing that.
You mentioned earlier the mirror. I feel like that's where it becomes a very powerful tool, because you're not looking in that mirror to reaffirm something within yourself. You're looking in that mirror in order to look in your eyes and have those difficult conversations
Mm-hmm.
and see what's really reflecting back at you. That's how I feel like you keep that pendulum swinging steadily.
Yeah.
And as we start to come toward the end of our time, I want you to speak to somebody that is just walked away from that mirror, realizing that that pendulum's not swinging correctly,
Mm.
and talk to them about the very first steps to bringing balance to that circle or bringing calm to that pendulum.
The term steps is a key term. Everything that you and I have done to do better and be better with ourselves and our mental health has been done in small steps. We can't just jump and like expect everything, take the magic pill looking for the cure. It's these layers of steps that we have to go through. And in order to do that, we really need to go through the pain of seeing ourselves where we're at, owning our issues. What is going on? What am I doing? And owning it. It's very painful sometimes. I remember years ago, I was fighting with my ex, and he was calling me a narcissist. And I was like, he was a major narcissist. I was like, no, I'm not the one with the problem. You are. And I just remember a couple of years later, and just something came up, and that came back in my head. And I was like, oh my God, what if he was right? What if I am a little selfish? And I'm like, how is this a problem for me? And in some ways, kind of like it was a strength for me in like managing, running a business. But in other ways, it was crossing a line into my relationships, and it was affecting my ability to have a healthy relationship. And that realization was like a tidal wave of pain that just came in. I was like, wow, because I saw it. I really saw it. Now, I wasn't looking in the mirror at the time, but it was like, own this. And that it was so painful to admit that out loud to myself. But then once I did, I was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is great. I can do something about this. And that's one of the major things that changed my life, and being a better person with the people that I love and that are most important to me, is to brought that into awareness. So that's just an example, is that we can't change what we don't see, but not only see it, but own it. And then set the intention to, what can I do to change this? And then be kind to ourselves in this process. Be non-judgmental. Don't judge yourself in this process, because it is difficult. And so we want to be very kind and patient in the steps that we're taking to get where we are, because it's worthwhile to be happy and content and peaceful in your life.
That's where I think that learning that ability to give yourself grace and have gratitude for the journey becomes so
Mm.
important. Because when you do walk away from that mirror that very first time, it's painful. It makes you want to run the other way. But if you allow yourself that space to be grateful for the fact that you did it, as well as grace for the pain,
Mm-hmm.
you can work through it a lot easier, because
Absolutely.
that pain is where the growth comes from.
It is the pain, but the pain is temporary. It's really temporary. But if you ignore it, that burying of that will follow you into the grave. But if you face it, it's temporary. I tell you, that pain, that wave of pain was so bad. I think it lasted 30 seconds. I thought it was going to knock. I was driving, probably not a good thing, but I thought it was going to knock me over. And I was like, holy smokes, we run from that. It lasted 30 seconds. And I was like, wow, I can change this, and I can use it as beneficial, and I can change it. And it's amazing. But yeah, the pain doesn't last, but it is there, and it's bad, but it's temporary, and it's totally worth it.
So if someone is looking for a catalyst to help them work their way through the pain, how do they reach out to you? What do you got coming up, going on, all that good stuff?
Well, I thank you. I reach out to me through my website is catherinegcleveland.com. I have some books. I actually have a book that got published this summer called Cultivating. It's the 3 J's. It's cultivating gratitude, gratefulness, and graciousness. And they're workbooks. And I use that. They're based practice informed. So I use my mental health counseling practice to see, wow, this is what some of the most common topics that people are talking about, and I put them into these interactive workbooks, which is what I'm working on right now. I have one on setting boundaries with people. That's a whole nother topic. And then the current one that I'm working on is kinder to myself. So this is what I work with my patients in many areas, which is the most common topics that come up. So I wanted to be able to give it at a really, like, it's very inexpensive to reach to a lot larger audience. Other than that, if you go to in your area and reach out to friends that are talking to counselors, if that's something that you're looking at doing, go ahead and ask around and ask for help. But you can always come to my website and shoot me an email, ask me questions. I'd be happy to help.
I think it's that willingness to find the help, and then honestly looking at how the person you reach out to can truly connect and help you to foster your growth.
Mm-hmm. And you may not always get the right fit the first time, but it's okay to ask questions. I'd be happy to answer questions as far as, like, how do I find that person? What are some things I should be looking for? But that's really important, because the general public doesn't know how to find the best help.
It's very true. I've learned that one firsthand.
Mm-hmm. Please be patient with it, because when you find the right person and the right program, it is out there. A lot of it would be people that are not necessarily working in clinics. They're more in private practice, people who are not insurance-based private practices. Not that everything, there's some great people that do take insurance, but they have a lot more freedom, and they are not being told how and what they can do with you. It's basically between you and them, and there's nobody getting in the middle of you and your treatment, dictating what you can and cannot do as the professional. So that's one of the things is it may be a little bit more expensive, but regardless, it doesn't mean that that's the only way to go. I mean, just start talking to people and be patient, and hopefully you'll get the right person. It is some of my best way people get my information out is just word of mouth. So that's why I always recommend, if you know somebody, say, hey, are you seeing anybody? Do you like them? To me, that's one of the best ways to find people that will fit you. Yeah.
take control, take agency over your own journey. Understand that it's unique. And the people that come in and out of that journey, you got a choice. You're allowed to say who stays and who goes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I don't believe in the words goodbye because I believe they're too final and just a waste of breath. So until we meet again, whether it's in this journey or the next, I wish you a safe and prosperous journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much for having me here. And it's a pleasure to meet you. And I'm very grateful for all the work. And I'm hopefully that you reach such a large audience. I hope that you get to reach more people. It's so important what you're doing. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Hopefully, we can connect again sometime soon and talk about a few other things that I thought we were going to hit on.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.